Добрий день, шановні.
Hello, dear participants of today's format of Geopolitical Dialogues. Today it is very special because we have that in the day of representative of diplomatic service, and of course, I would like to say some congratulations and speak, but I will say that we have a very special guest today who is a good representation of this day, Volodymyr Ohryzko, not just the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and well-known Ukrainian diplomat, but also the person who remembers pretty well all the stages of development of our diplomatic service, I think, since 1978, when, almost 50 years ago, in state service. I was an attaché. Okay, starting with the attaché, and then the advisor, the embassies of Germany and Austria, the ambassador in Austria, and also the correct career growth, first deputy minister, and then also first deputy advisor, etc., etc. But all those are the positions. And many things are not mentioned in your biography, but I think it's very important, the work at the administration of President as the head of foreign political affairs, and also work in a strategic group, Ukrainian-Russian at the time. We will talk about that, I think. And, well, now you are the head of the Center of Prevention of Russian Regime, as I call it. But for you, it is called, it is Center of Research of Temporarily Existing Russia. So you have lots of positions. But here I would like to ask you, Volodymyr Stanislavovich, I will ask you to start with the congratulations, because I congratulate you with the day of diplomatic service. And I think that maybe if our diplomats are now watching us, those who are preparing their suits in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I know also you will celebrate. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Valeriy Alexeyevich. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, because indeed it's a great pleasure. I will be honest, not many people nowadays, experts, diplomats, with whom it is really nice to talk, because you are one of not many who are looking in depth. And it is very interesting indeed to discuss with you different events, who said what and who. Usually some small and uninteresting things are discussed, but you are one of the not many experts today in the field of foreign policy who are thinking in categories, and that is why I'm really pleased that today we are here again and we can actually talk about such things. And I would also like to greet you as a colleague, because I'm sorry, being ambassador of Ukraine in the USA, it's not such an easy thing to do. So it's our joint holiday and celebration. I would like to congratulate, and I would like to congratulate all our dear colleagues, because, I will be honest, it's a hard work. And only those who don't know all the details of the service, they think that, it's just drinking some champagne at the events, and these are nice smiles during diplomatic meetings, and that's it. But actually, if being serious, it's a very hard, analytical, serious, very hard work, intellectually exhausting, I can say, work. So I'm really pleased that today we all Ukrainian diplomats are coming back, both to our past, but also we are looking, I hope, forward to our future. And in spite of the fact that some people think nowadays that we are in the weak position, that's not true, in my opinion. We are actually in the point which will open for Ukraine very serious and very successful prospects. We just need to focus our will to the maximum, and we need to win, because I'm going to use now the formula of like, we need to defeat, like, the real enemy, because for Ukrainian diplomacy, it's we have more important. I think Ukrainian diplomacy has no more important tasks than that. So I would like to say that we haven't reached our list of diplomatic words, because all the diplomats took probably these vocabularies of Cold War, where it was not like the non-piloted transport, but drone, and different types of weapons are called in American manner, because in Soviet times they were classified differently. So these words were later on included as words of enemy assessment. And I would say you mentioned that very softly regarding what is happening, but I like to join the things that you mentioned, and I would like to say another thing, that the day of workers of diplomatic service, it's not just about diplomats, it's also about those who are helping, like in foreign diplomatic institutions, central apparatus. They support to conduct this diplomatic activity, and I would like to congratulate them, because those are like lawyers, administrative workers. Now there is a lot of work done abroad and hopefully in Hague. So I would like to congratulate everybody broadly, but I am repeating this over and over again, and I want everyone to remember that at least in Ukraine, that diplomatic service, it's a very real service. It's not the diplomacy of borscht or something else, like public diplomacy, but Ukrainian professional diplomacy is defined by law on diplomatic service. And I will say, by the way, I would like to ask you, who in Ukraine is the first diplomat in terms of position, like diplomat number one? Well, I like to come back to greetings one more time, and I will say one thing. Well, I've been talking about that quite often lately, but I would like to have the history of Ukrainian diplomacy and start that not from the times of Ukrainian People's Republic, but starting from the 10th century, when there was an officially documented the first written agreement between Rus and Byzantium, I think 3rd or 4th September 911. Before that, in the 9th century, 40 years before the date, there were some witnesses who said that such agreements of Rus with Byzantium were concluded, but there are no written evidence. So when celebrating now this day of diplomatic service, you mentioned a big number of our colleagues without whom our diplomatic service wouldn't have been possible. Can we imagine the work of diplomatic institution abroad where there's no service that will ensure documentation? Chaos. It's chaotic, and you don't know what do you do tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. But if you have the person who clearly organizes all the work, then it means everything works perfectly. So, coming into the history just a bit, it seems to me that we will come also to the point where we will start counting our diplomatic service since those times. And thus, I would like to mention one more time, Ukraine is not about Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, as it seems to somebody. No, it's in depth of ages, and we have to be proud of the fact that Ukrainian diplomatic service has many hundreds of years of traditions, and we have to respect those. So who's the main diplomat? Taking the constitution, and in Constitution it says, black and white, that the President of Ukraine is the central figure in implementation of foreign policy of Ukraine. It doesn't mean that he's the only one, because there is a Minister of Foreign Affairs, there is Prime Minister, there is a head of Verkhovna Rada, because there are other structures that to a certain extent they join this broad course. But, well, personal responsibility and what is called like implementation of the course. Of course, it's the president of Ukraine together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because it can't be any different. Yeah, I knew for sure that you will say that very diplomatically, and if you allow, I would like to mention my opinion. According to the law, it's a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and now it is still unclear because it's also a political figure. So it turns out that the State Secretary is the only highest diplomat in the law and state service. So it doesn't like coincide. So in this society, like Article 6, like the president, but don't forget that there are people in diplomatic positions, and that is the ministers of today on the position. Yeah, I agree, but if we take the draw part, then yes. If political aspect, then, well, yeah, in a political sense, absolutely. So we can say that he is heading the foreign policy of the president, yeah, 100%. And what we did not forget is that diplomats, war diplomats, military diplomats. It's a very broad situation nowadays. It didn't happen during the Russian war against Ukraine, but earlier, obviously. And those who starting from the border service who are working on the border, and in our case, that is the borderline service. In America, for example, those are different types of troops, like the navies, for example, etc., etc. But we have the border guards, and well, in addition, we have the military attachés, and they are widely represented, especially in the conditions of war. Many people have become diplomats during this time, and many more will become, because those who are fighting at the front line nowadays, and I can see for sure that part of those people, well, not just as president says, they have the right to return, back and into their profession, but I think they have all the rights. And I would just like to wish to all of those who've been working with a foreign battalion, but then in a bigger unit, a brigade, those who were using languages and language education, because you can't cope without that, of course, so fast, but there are languages, experience, and managerial opportunities. So for sure, part of those will be absolutely able to compete in this all. And I think that for the people, they won't be presented with positions, but they will deserve to work abroad and in this field and for a long time in the conditions of the war. That we see no end to this war as of now, but I would like to wish to such people to find the second profession, as it already happened to many of those who came in the 90s, right? Not with you, because you are since 78, but in 98 you were the extraordinary ambassador. No, you hurry a bit. Well, at least you were all the time on the diplomatic service. Okay, so congratulated. So why we have to do that still for a long time? Of course, now all the attention is paid to, and as you mentioned correctly, that often you visit different events and different meetings. I don't want to repeat those, because they are asking questions like that. People want to hear, when the war will come to an end, how that all will end, will the peaceful agreement be effective, etc., etc. But I think that we all agree that we will combat Russia in different forms till defragmentation of Russia, or the change of their regime, because unfortunately our colleague is not with us now, but Vasilenko, very important Ukrainian diplomat, he said that it's existential war and it will last until the events will happen that we want to happen, and they will happen actually, because most probably, well, my opinion is that nowadays they're in the period when their empire is breaking down, maybe like Russian or even Soviet. How do you think? What is the historical period now that our enemy is going through? I agree, Mr. Valeriy, with you, because today we are talking about one thing, how long this kind of, not completely an empire, because after 1991 it's not the empire that it used to be, but if we also recall the times of that empire before the World War I, you know, the empire that is kind of going down, because it is kind of becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, and the biggest one was in 1991, but now it is coming to the next stage. And you know, when my colleagues and I, we are discussing such things, we are coming to the conclusion that actually, if not for this war criminal who is managing this kind of an empire, it could have been rotting for a certain time. It could have been something like, you know, half alive, half dead. But the positive thing, taking into account some tendencies of liberal West, it could have been using their opportunities for some time, selling cheap oil and gas, and just continue this period of their rotting. But what happened in 2022? It became this thing that is speeding up the process. So I totally agree with you. Now it's on the stage of its finish, ending. I think that our main task is in order to speed up the process, to speed up how, right? So here, usually, there are different assessments. Somebody says our victory is coming back to the borders of, I don't know, 2022. Somebody says 1991. I am saying it's the time when political subject under the name like Russian Federation, it will be gone from the political map, because anything that remains under such a name, it doesn't matter will there be Putin or Navalny or whoever it is, still they will recover, because it is the kind of the creature that is recovering, and in order for it to die, we need to do the things that our heroes are doing every day. So today, get 2 messages. 2 planes destroyed. Port Temryuk attacked. Right? Several days ago, attacks to oil processing stations, military objects, etc., etc. The faster the resource will be gone, Russian resource, the sooner they will stop their existence. Why? Because Putin's regime, in spite of all of his desires to show himself as powerful, strong, and adequate, etc., etc., still he is he's holding on a straw, and this straw is economy. Well, look, he started the war, this criminal, when the price to oil was $110 per barrel. Now it's 35. I am just showing short parallels. USSR, like Soviet Union and Russia nowadays, totally identical. And Soviet Union back then, the war in Afghan has come to an end. Today, everything becomes more and more aggravated, and the economists are like crying, so to say, with crocodile tears, because they say that probably 2026 is the last year when Putin will have the opportunity to somehow balance between war and existence. But if economy will be destroyed, then I think that there is no such regime that will be able to cope with that. So they came to the finish line, and our aim is to help for this finish line to end as soon as possible. Yeah, I totally agree, but the thing is that the empire was breaking down different times, and if we look at that historically, so the Roman Empire was breaking for a long time, and then sooner and sooner, so we don't know the day and month. It might come really in a really unexpected way, and it might last for years. If, for example, in my opinion, we have the policy like our partners have, because they are taking care of Russia. And like postponing these actions. They allow this regime to hold on, and this empire can survive further on. And I would say that it's kind of a suicidal approach in a way, because it would have been logical to unite efforts with Ukraine and make themselves safe from East. Yeah, you took my words, I dare say, because, well, actually in the head of our partners, both American and European, it's just an image that they have, this scary fear, sorry for my tautology. What is, for the usual, for example, American politician here, what is the end of Russia? It's scary. Why? And Russia is wonderfully playing on that, and I think we need to learn from them, because they can convert the fear into inactivity. They are scaring us that if, God save us, Russia falls apart, then Putin will be an angel for you. Big happiness, because there will be like somebody else instead of Putin or whoever it is, and he will just press the button. So you have Putin be happy and pray to your gods and light the candles. But even if we imagine that there will be no such like apocalyptic scenario, then there will be civil war. Because Putin, like many times, he was saying that, look, between the Federation subjects, there is more than 200 different contradictions that at any moment might explode. Right? So let us take Caucasus, for example. There, like when you talk about the border, then indeed it's some explosive material that was made still back by Stalin. And today's propaganda in Moscow is playing on that. What will start? What will be there? What if it becomes uncontrollable? Then there will be hell. Do you need it? No. So we have to all together keep this perfect version of the future. Look what good Russians say. Perfect Russia should be in their borders, and anybody who says differently, those are extremists, terrorists, etc., etc. So Putin is selling fear to the West, and the West is buying that. And well, now with our colleagues, we are thinking, like, how do we start calmly, but in detail? How can we explain to our Western partners that there will be no nuclear war? Because a bit like running ahead of the things, and I'm communicating with many respected military representatives of a very high levels and positions, both now and in the past, and I just figure out what might happen just in case. And the answer is very simple: the end of the world. And everybody understands that perfectly well. So when people are saying that, okay, Putin might press the button and the rockets will go towards the USA or America, it's blackmailing. That's lies. And how do we explain that to our Western partners, that they should not be afraid of that because it won't happen? Well, that's a topic for consideration and some practical actions. And now we are working in order to gain a certain list of arguments, facts, etc., that this won't happen. And theoretically, we might imagine that, well, there might be a hit of tactical weapons, I think. But here some political aspects come into place, because if this is happening, then that's it. This country is taken from all the sides, for sure, by everyone, because even China, if we are talking about, they are like nearest partner. Even China says clearly that the nuclear weapon should not be at the battlefield. It's clear. Because even if for Putin or people who are after that won't work, then they will be taken apart in political sense already. So the argument is not of high quality. Regarding regional problems, well, they might be resolved, but we need to work for that, and we need to understand the knots of tension, and we need to develop certain plans in order to untangle the knots. So we are working in this field, and I think that we will be able to reach some understanding. And we should not be afraid that, like, Russia will fall apart. Well, now other managers are afraid of that, but there is objective logics, right? And that says that in this way, Russia won't exist anymore. That's it. Yeah, that's how it is, but it's a point of view to the future, and now people are living in really short periods of time. But if you talk about tactical nuclear weapons, the problem is that they have not done the trials for like 30 years at least, and they themselves, they wanted to do that. Well, you remember the former head Burns, he was saying that in 2022 in autumn, really Americans perceived this, that Russia will use a tactical nuclear weapon. Well, they were scared, let us say it so. But when there was a task, like there was a meeting and of the Council of Security, and then, like, not the new minister, like civilian, but the military, Gerasimov took the floor. The head of the staff general, he said, don't hurry, we need like 9 months. So you understand what we are talking about. They themselves don't know what will happen, but it's like Russia is exploding the tactical weapons and they don't explode. Then, okay, we undress and we show that we are not capable. And we come back and we don't just turn our back, they're back to America, but also to China. And they don't have, still, they're like nuclear weapons. But I think that when we are talking about that, it's not even a weapon, it's the factor to stop this pressure. And Russia are using that as to stop from pressure. But again, it is working just against some small countries that need to show like what will happen to you in case if something, because between the big countries, that's it, that's the end. Especially when this discussion is starting between our partners in Europe, that's scary, because I think it's unrealistic assessment of situation. I think it's a sign of that in Europe they really don't want to look at the situation. They don't want to make important decisions. Let us imagine the average prime minister in a European country. Why should they look beyond the horizon and think what will happen in 10 years and 5 years? His term is 4 years, and the next one, let them figure out. Let us imagine the real head of the country. So there's such a country, like historically very powerful, who was winning from the Russian and was burning Russia down with their works of, they are proud of their works in this regard. It's France, right? So they took from Germany, from France. So all of a sudden, Putin comes last week and he is calling them names, the bad names, the heads of those countries. And he is saying like they are like kind of pigs, and naming the heads with such names. President of France wants to meet with Putin now. How do we call that? Well, okay, we always want to have some negotiation tracks that are leading towards the end of the large-scale war, because it seems that we also need a pause right now. But here, there's such readiness, like, accept me, just to talk about this definition? Or why does Macron want this? I understand. Well, first of all, I agree with you, because it should have been somehow elegant reaction to all of that. But, Mr. Valeriy, if we should not get used to this person in the world policy, I would say it, everything around them, they don't care about that, because his mania has gone through the last stage, I think. Well, he never talked like that about the non-European leaders. Well, he didn't allow himself to talk like that about the American president, but he thinks that the leaders are too weak. Okay, how would you offer the French people to respond nicely? Well, I mean that, how can we force the British Queen to wait for an hour or 1.5 till he will come? How is that possible to the Pope of Rome to make him wait? How can you, for hours, by the way? His own friend, who is not okay with dogs, he just traumatized her because he wanted to have a big dog, etc. So it's diplomatic, it's impolite, even in human sense, not even in diplomatic sense. Yeah, those are things from KGB. Yeah, so you understand it's the person who thinks that he is capable of all the things that in civilized society are not accepted. And here, it's a totally logical thing. Why, in such a soft way or in no way, Western civilization is reacting to that? But I have the question. First, this Western civilization was just corrupted by Putin himself. Let us be sincere about these things. Let us not play the nice things. Yeah, we could see that from the positions that leaders were gaining. Okay, right. What is the advisor in Gazprom or the member of the advisory board? Well, it's just a good amount of money that is given as a bribe. And I think that the person did not earn that much in their position as they were getting in the view of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of Australia, well-known dancer, and many, many others. By the way, the center, my colleague in Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, they have a registry of such Putin's minions, and every time I'm just amazed when they write certain Western politician and they say that about them. And I say, okay, probably it's like the last, but I don't intervene. I will tell you the approximate assessments that I've got from my colleagues, and we have some hybrid threats, and we've never had the reclamations. Why? Because very fast after this assessment, those politicians, all of a sudden, they were either in Gazprom or wherever else. Now I don't like the tendency because it is touching upon the Americans. Look at the advisor of President Trump, who was there recently in negotiations. He was pushing them towards negotiations. So now he is the head of Russian, his advisor of Lukoil. And we can see the tendency from Americans in the nearest month, actually. So that is the first factor that I think is crucial when we are assessing this lack of Western reaction. Well, corrupted. Let us be honest. They get bribes as certain positions. They come once per half a year. In the best case, they eat black caviar, then they eat red caviar, drink champagne, and go home. I know that perfectly well because I have some information about the role in these structures. The next factor, I would like to say, it's useful idiots. In a good sense of the word, diplomatic. There is such a definition in English, Well, these are people that due to their beliefs, left beliefs, they think that Putin is doing a good job. He's a good guy because he is setting the focus really well, and he's representative of great, beautiful Russia that has to be at least equal to all the others. They don't think that they need to look to the books on economic growth and see that they're their GDP is lower, that it goes to total minus, etc., etc. But Russia, for them, you know, the cultural label, at least. Yeah, but in the past, because now Russia has absolutely nothing in this sense. It's like more about Russian Empire. Yeah, absolutely. That is something that is taken from there and it is transformed into something that, like, Russia is wonderful and nice now as well. So it's a culture of murders and rapes, etc., etc. That is the culture that they are demonstrating wonderfully nowadays. And I think that maybe only in some countries of them, like other continents, but we won't speak about that nowadays. But this is the moment that is impacting the things that are happening. And let us not forget Russian cultural aggression, because it is lasting for dozens of years and it is very, very successful. And actually, its goal is to form these useful idiots in all the spheres of life of Western countries. And recently, I saw our Ukrainian Institute has conducted very interesting research about the so-called cultural diplomacy of Russia and Germany. So at the head, there is Grushny, like a person who has like no doubts, then under him up to 200 structures that are working in cultural activity. We can only imagine what narratives are transmitted by that person to all of the structures and what is happening, right? These are obvious things. So we have some structures that have changed their form, and they're saying like, well, Russia is good, why do you treat them this way? And thus we are coming to the point that some governmental issues make them look at Russia with these eyes. Thanks God there are others who have gone through this stage already, and now even after this full-scale war, and the societies also start understanding what is happening, but this process has just started. And before that, everything was fine. Russia is great, wonderful, and cultural, etc., etc. Belly, well, in addition to belly, also cheap gas for Germany. Indeed, I can add, you saw that better in Germany, in Austria, right? There is fear after the Second World War. And indeed, historically, that remains. Because the Nazis have started the war, but what was done in Berlin in the last days of war, well, it is remembered as fear, right? But, well, from this Soviet fear that was imposed, by the way, only by Moscow, because Kiev was not imposing that, even though we have to recognize that there were, yeah, those who received the victory are Ukrainians, and, yeah. So in a perfect world, there should be some fear to our front that went to Europe, but Ukraine never blackmailed Germany with that. Why? Why is that this way? Not now, but in the previous dozens of years, the Ukrainian diplomacy has never, well, even in official speeches, we never used reminders to Germans about their defeat in the Second World War. It's vice versa. We were trying to take them from this condition, being tolerant, using the development of the economic relationship. Why? Well, of course we want to ask, like, why? Because people are different in Moscow than in Kyiv, but how do you think, is that correct that Ukraine stepped aside from this? So they did not become they did not, like, inherit this historical memory, because some people are saying, like, let us recall that those were our grandpas, yeah, together with Russians, Belarusians, and Georgian people. We were having this victory together. We received this victory together. Why Putin is taking everything to Russia? Well, as for the subordination, I would like to say, just to mention one example, and I think that this question will just disappear after that. Before the speech of our ministers of foreign affairs of USSR, the Assembly General, their attacks of speeches had to go through the so-called control on a certain floor of constant representation of the Soviet Union. And I think that after that, saying that we had the opportunity to talk about something without, so to say, the permission from Moscow, well, it was not possible. So, though I'd like to say that I always recalled, and I will recall the example, Mr. Rudovenko, I think it's very powerful, probably the most powerful personality after the regaining our independence, who, in this or other way, tried to omit some of the orders coming from the top level, so to say. For example, the practice was that everybody had to deliver a speech in Russian, and all the meetings and committees were like the general session of Assembly General, the language for everyone, for all these socialistic parties, and including Russia and Belarus, and Ukraine and Belarus, it was Russian. Maybe it's because it's one of the UN languages. Well, it is clear, but we do understand what we were talking about. So, for example, like Romanian people, right? They were neglecting that quite often, and they were switching to English, etc. But Mr. Rudovenko, who was elected to bodies of certain committees, he was conducting the work of the committee in English. So something was told to him and everything, but he says, I was elected to a high position, the head of the committee, etc., etc. Yeah, so it's not the committee of Soviet countries or post-Soviet countries. Yeah, he says, I had to act according to the UN standards. And there were some cases when our delegations did not vote in a way the so-called allies, how our allies, so-called at the time, were voting. So, Mr. Valeriy, I don't know whether you had some important positions during Soviet times. I will be honest, the vertical was very tough. My first position was attaché in the new Department of Euro-Atlantic Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1994. Okay, see? But here we are talking, well, at least I touched upon the 80s of the last century. And, well, closer to the end, when we could feel that it is falling apart a bit, it was a bit easier, but thus it was quite a serious thing. As for historical memory, and whether we can, so to say, use that. It seems to me that now, well, I've been working with Germany for quite some time, and I think that quite deeply I've been analyzing their societal psychology. How many years, all total? Germany and Austria, 10 years in this German-speaking environment. Okay, we have so many people, not so many people who can assess on this level, the dynamics that was happening. Yes, very interesting that you noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that indeed this historical trauma was very strong for Germans, very strong for Austrians in the context of the last, and this neutrality that was imposed on them so that they don't go higher than needed is, so to say. So, by the way, in Austria, it's still the topic that is almost not discussed, even though several weeks ago I was in Vienna for a conference, and there are some things, maybe we should think of the example of Finland, Sweden, etc., etc. So these are good signals. But regarding Germany, by the way, now they have the historical chance to put down the burden of that historical responsibility. Why? Because in front of the eyes of all the people, some crimes are happening. that are not much different from the horrible things that Germans were doing. Yeah, there are no concentration camps, even though, well, they are in Russia where our militaries are going, and then what our militaries are saying, like, I don't know whether human can just cope with that, but it is horrible. So today Germans can say, like, nah, that already happened in our history. Yeah, we've gone through that, we are guilty, we recognize that, we will continue having this burden. But look what's happening in the east of Europe when Russian barbarians are exceeding everything that can just be imagined, being cynical in their destruction, etc., etc. So I think that in this case we should not omit with attention that, well, Ukraine made significant input into victory over Nazis. We've been fighting this evil during all the years of war, just like with all the other evil. You know, the last fights ended up in the 1950s. That means that in this or other way, Ukrainians just understood that there was war for the with two front lines. Yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you with that. Somehow other countries, Poland for example, because they've been also fighting for the two front lines against Nazis and Bolsheviks and Stalin troops, so they can talk about that, like Army Krajowa, etc., etc. So why other countries who were in between the two greats, because like Poland was divided many times, it's Polish tragedy, but they were recovering all the time, and thanks to these people, I think that we have come to an end of this discussion because we had a very difficult situation. We were attacked from both sides, and we have to understand that. Because just like veterans who were fighting the Nazis and also the Bolsheviks, still there is this discussion in this society. Those are heroes of the countries. Those are heroes who wanted to save our country so that this country is not destroyed. How many things were told about Caucasus, but how many Caucasian countries of Caucasus Russia just destroyed? What Shevchenko writes in his works, that's about Caucasus, and he could see that. What about Lermontov? He's writing how in his poems he says how the woman was raped by the very brave soldiers. That's horrible. Because they just kill lots of nationalities, and there are some nationalities on the territory of Russia that have no place of their own. They are in America, in Turkey, etc., and we have the right for that. And you said it's a long story actually about Europe, so I think that we are truly hoping that everything that you mentioned, at least that Germans and the Chancellor is speaking about that confidently, and they are making some steps already towards that, and they are scaling manufacturing of weapons. I think they slept over the period, but the question is the issue, model of safety. I want to switch to that. Well, they say for Ukraine, but the first question may be that's the model of safety for the whole Europe, and Ukraine is included as part of the new, historically correct space that is being formed in front of our eyes. We don't know where the temporary line of the front will be, but we know that these borders are the borders of the new world. And we don't know, maybe Belarus with Moldova will also be in that, and this is a logical line. And if we go further to Ural, it's even more logical, but it's the next stage. So the model of safety, my question is regarding that. So about the details of today, somehow we have the discussion again about trading our decision about NATO and our joining the NATO forces, etc., with Americans. I always thought that it's the sovereign right to define that, but the model of safety, neutrality, in your opinion, this story is not already even being considered, or in these Russian ones we are again talking about like Ukraine and Europe that has to come back to 1996. So Europe is asking for guarantees from Moscow. Really, really, we have that, and you are included, and I am in the same network with the former Secretary General of NATO, etc., etc. They are saying like second track of diplomacy with Moscow, Putin's guarantees not to attack them. So still, which model has to be offered by us from Europe? Not just wait for Putin, because it used to be like to Lisbon, etc., etc. So how do you think which model should be there? What it should rely on? Only like NATO, or somehow like it should be different? Which place remains there for this like neutrality? And I think that Austria was mentioned and Switzerland, almost nothing's left. Yeah, absolutely. That is the key issue. And thank you very much for coming to the topic right now, because I think that this topic is very important. Well, everything that will happen afterwards in the next years and maybe dozens of years will depend on that. If we try to look into the future, I don't give Russia much time for present existence, like existence as they are existing right now. So in some period of time, they will just disappear because physically they won't be able to cope and stay within these boundaries. So one small element will be ruined. Anywhere, Caucasus or Far East, etc., then everything will be ruined, just like it was with the Soviet Union. So we have some historical experience that we have. It's just not everybody in Europe who are studying that. By the way, it's very sad. They are wasting hundreds, millions, if not billions of dollars to research more about Russia, and still they don't understand it. So coming back to the topic of safety, I think that the basis for all of that should be European NATO. Look, what can be heard today from Washington, your favorite city, Mr. Valeriy, where you spent wonderful 5 years, right, as an ambassador? Yeah, well, everybody was working with Washington for a long time, but in the 2000s, where we had this hope, we signed the charter. By the way, I would like to mention, like straight away, like Ukrainian NATO, right? There is your signature in there. So still, the model of safety, because the USA is important, but we have some other countries as well in addition to that. Yeah, as of now, I think that till the end of Trump's presidency in NATO and European Union are bad. Okay, but is the USA not in NATO anymore? So you don't see yourself already part of this alliance? It's a simple question. NATO and the European Union. Well, look, I will surprise you because they are even in the International Union of Trade. Well, I do understand that, but it's a sign that this administration, unfortunately, they will ruin everything that had been created, and they will step on the things that exist already, just as an elephant, they will just stamp their feet on everything. So coming back to the issue of safety, we have no other choice but unite our efforts with the key European countries that are capable of fighting. Not with all of them. We don't need these like Moscow's efforts. We need Hungary with Orban. We need Fitz in Slovakia. So sorry that in Czech Republic we have like another person. No, we need the countries that are capable of saying like, yeah, in case of attack, they get serious military response. That is what might become the basis for Moscow to understand it. Okay, then we won't go in there. Because if today there is 1,000, as I read recently, the information, 1,000 of drones in the last several months were over Germany, and Germany is thinking, can we just hit them or not? What is that about? Is that about the good result and the good response? It's about the cultural program that was conducted by Russia for years in Germany, maybe Great Britain. Now you see, coming back to Germany, Merz, I think that he knows about the history. Because I've been writing a dissertation about Germany and their relationship from the times of Brandt, etc., etc. I've been analyzing all of them on my fingers, So the first German chancellor who decided that Germany has to come back to the world policy, but not as a boy for beating up, but as an effective player. If we succeed to combine the efforts of Great Britain, France, Germany, Poland, Ukraine, maybe also Italy, it is already the spine of the thing that exists already. Add some northern Baltic countries and parts of others, so to say, and we have the real spine, the real skeleton, the system that will function. But again, not as Article 5 of Washington Agreement. I'm criticizing that all the time because what is written there does not provide for immediate and response. We are talking about support. Support might be different. Medical kits is support. Protective helmets, also support, etc. In confirmation of your words, when in 2001 some articles were used, not all the countries were acting in military sense. I need to remind that even non-NATO members sometimes did more than NATO members, and Ukraine provided the battalion for chemical protection. Well, what we could do at the time, it was a hard solution for Ukraine. And I think that, back then, we came to a decision that we need to leave. But again, additionally, as you mentioned, because you named a really broad circle, so as a matter of fact, it's the middle of NATO. Well, Canada can be also in there. And I am jumping from topic to topic, but there might be some threats for these countries, and it was even hard to imagine those, because yesterday assigned the advisor representative of the USA in Greenland, he is already showing some interest to Greenland, and Danish. Danish government is having their intelligence in terms of USA and Greenland. So this range of countries that works better for today's conditions, like northern countries, and then, as a matter of fact, central and eastern part of all this system of safety. It is like Great Britain, northern countries, Germany, Poland, Ukraine. Romania, I don't know about them, most probably. Okay, but still, we've been offering to our Ministry for Foreign Affairs, we offer this triangle, Great Britain, Poland, Ukraine, and nuclear Britain. Then we have, for example, the infantry from ours and the fleet from Great Britain, and they asked to not undermine NATO from inside. Yeah, okay, but Americans did that nowadays, and I think there is no way to do that even further, and it's a good thing to open eyes of our partners for them to realize that they need to think of themselves. And again, unfortunately, it is not done during one overnight. But what is NATO? First of all, is the attempt of the United States of America. Nowadays, we don't have that, right? Well, at least in comparison with American one. So we need that in Germany, Sweden, Norway, everywhere that functions according to the list, so that Europe grows up in terms of their military capacities to the level of global player, to the level of America. Yeah, so thanks God nowadays, and I would like to mention, by the way, coming back to this almost an empire, if now they start the fight of creating weapons, it's another thing that helps us create some bad conditions for Russia. So if they do this, then Russia has nowhere to go. They either have to respond or they have to lose. And that's the additional element to discussion about like how the history of today's Russia will end up with a defeat because they won't cope economically. And where should Europe go? USA is saying like, no, Europe, your problem. We are here, Western Hemisphere. We have Trump's doctrine number 2, and you just figure out where you just take your enemies. What might become real, sir, for Europe to switch to this opinion? Because now it's just the opinion of intelligence and militaries in Europe. They are talking about that openly already. If earlier they were talking about the possibility of Russian attack in 2030, so they might say no. They say that it might happen in the next year or two. So might it be the violation of territorial integrity of European countries? Well, I mean these who are bordering the NATO countries. So like trigger if Russians are brave enough to do that. Well, here maybe it's a bit not traditional approach. I think they won't do that. They won't be brave enough to do that because let us see the situation realistically, right? I mean, Russia, it's already almost 4 years, 1 month and a half, till 4 years. They can't go further in the framework of 2 oblasts, and they cannot capture those. Why? Because they have no other opportunities. They don't have resources. Can you imagine the second front line is opened? Like Tartu, whatever. But in 48 hours, the airspace above Russia, at least above the big territory, is going to be fully controlled by NATO. That is just first fast response. What if that happens, the on-land provocation or special operation where they use robotic systems, like the group that will enter the territory of NATO for 48 hours, they will go there and they will leave. And they will show how weak the reaction is. In these 48 hours, they have to be destroyed. But they won't be destroyed. They won't be destroyed because Europe is not ready to that yet. What we are talking about is in the future. Yes, so we as Ukrainians who understand what Russia is in practical sense, we have to be the initiators today. The thing that later on will be called by this new system of safety in Europe, and we have to tell both to French people, Germans, and other friends of ours in the north and Baltic countries, etc. And we should have offered an option of this organization of European safety for those who want to and who can and who understands what to do. By the way, the 5th article of Washington Agreement, but maybe we should write a menu, as I call it, of the things that will be done in case if Russia comes. Right? You say 48 hours, the provoked actions in Estonia. I'm not talking about Estonia. Okay, I am talking about Estonia. Okay. So, Tartu, it's the example that it is possible, like the city is actually divided from the 2 sides. Go in there, no problem. What will happen just in case if the group of, we don't know who, like without military science, they will go there. So, for example, they are coming like in 10 hours, they are destroyed with all the possible means. In order to do that, such plans are developed. And I think that it's a very good factor, like stopping factor. So Russia should know that if such case happens, this is the punishment. Turkey, okay? Putin is positively communicating with them. He hugs Erdogan, etc. What did they do when there was war in Syria? they hit Russian plane when it came into their airspace for a few minutes, and they even killed the pilot when he was going down out of the plane. This is a reaction clear for Moscow. If you are disturbed, Putin's laughing. Be disturbed further on. Continue your worries. Not a problem. I'll do whatever I want till the first moment when he is hit on his head. Okay, we have maximum 10 more minutes. Yeah, for you to end. And not to forget the important and interesting questions, because we all listen to you attentively indeed. In Europe, that is approximately the narratives that are used. But I think that in case of some pause or something like that, I don't really believe into this pause, but if Ukrainian management will go for it in the conditions that we have as of now, but Russians will of course ruin that, but then we have some resource, and Russians are considering that as well. And to be sincere, they are saying that we already need to think, we need to help Ukraine on the territory of Ukraine. Finally, we started such discussions. As for the safety, we spoke of that, some basic moments, we spoke about that as well. I think that, well, and I will say that one more time, I will say that, not instead of you, but I would like to remind that when the president of Ukraine is saying that we can speak about the NATO, then we should not forget that in addition to the constitution of Ukraine, we also have the bilateral documents, and America has own documents. So you're saying Trump, not just Trump. Now we will have a very interesting situation. That is my prognosis. In several months, in half a year maybe, the Congress will start covering these problems, and they will fill in the safety issues or subjectivity in the world, American subjectivity. So we have some elements that are blocking the hopes, or they are vice versa, they are promoting them to some action. So I don't think that American Congress and the people of America will allow to put all of that apart. However, taking into account how they are acting in some spheres, there are huge risks. I will come back to Ukrainian foreign policy. I didn't want you to talk about the current negotiations today, because they are very weird for me today, about who is in the delegation and many other aspects. But the question is simple, and it is still unclear for me. In the conditions that we had, where we see that the USA are going towards Russia, they are causing pressure on us, and Russia together with the USA are causing pressure on Europe, and China is looking at that, and Putin. Yeah, again, what should be the configuration? Two questions. Configuration of coming out of the full-scale war. Who's the intermediary? Because I'm already tangled in all of that. You know, you remember when we were talking that the intermediary might be Saudi Arabia, and then a range of African leaders came. So, by the way, he came back and he was put to jail, but he was offering to be the intermediary. So Turkey was offering also in this configuration, who might be the intermediary? Or maybe it might be the forum, etc. Who should be the participant of the forum, etc. The interim, as of now, or already like final in all the safety system, how is that now? It's too early to speak about that, but maybe you can like prognose that somehow, and the role of. Well, the question is that like after the Second World War, some general forum, the conference where all the key players of the world will participate? We will talk about European safety, including Ukraine, like the big decision, or still it's going to be something like the interim decision in the nearest years? Well, you know, it's actually a very philosophical topic. It is hard to prognose right now, but if we make a parallel with the Second World War, there was a clear defeat of the enemy, of Germany. Is there a clear defeat of Russia nowadays? No. As of now, no. I think we have to divide the options into two. If we are talking about defeat of Russia, I totally agree with you. There will be something like this global conference, probably, because it will be about the global safety. No matter how it is, like for such a territory as Russia to disappear from the map of the world, of course, it's the earthquake, and we have to regulate that correctly so that, like, for all of it to hold together. And I think that some options are totally possible. And I think that if our Western partners together with us would have started already to work on certain regions and elites with military by the way of Russian Federation, just explaining to them that you have the choice, either like some bloody battles full of blood or some cooperation, right, to coexist and develop and build proper future. That is what Americans are offering to them nowadays. They won't go for it. They are showing that they took like one-way ticket. Well, I would say it's not that much about central, then it's more about regional authorities, because in Moscow, of course, we won't see that from Moscow. And now they will have this line and the war will be frozen. As a matter of fact, Russia will not consider themselves defeated. The situation will remain as it is. And then I think we have to clearly kind of bring our line towards kind of creation of European system with or without the participation of America, because according to, well, present management, it's almost impossible to prognose Trump's actions, so we need to follow this path. Will we succeed? Well, only in case if our key European partners will finally show some political will and they will realize that there is no other way to work, no other way possible. And if we can imagine like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or like Vietnam, nothing. Well, they cannot play their intermediary role because they have no power for influence. I'm so sorry that Americans took this role on themselves, because till January this year, we had the understanding that the world consists of civilized part and the wild part, that is this autocratic, communistic, etc., etc. USA has ruined all of that. They said, as a matter of fact, like, we are not interested. Who started that? Who ended that? Who's the aggressor? Well, I won't say that, well, it is all covered, because from the beginning of the aggression, all this remains. So it's not about not about USA, it's about executive power, etc., etc. Yeah, I agree, but as of today, we have the role of this new administration that is, well, at least themselves and also the USA together with them, they took them out of the, well, list of countries for whom there was black and white understanding of everything that is happening. Recall Biden. He was calling Putin a criminal, right? And he was saying that he's aggressor. What do we hear from Trump? There were never such words from him. It's a separate story, as it is said, but, in the USA, instead of becoming the driver of change and, well, desire to put Russia to its place, he turned into his advocate. And as of now, the USA is performing all the wants of Russia, covering themselves with this, like, Moscovian plan that is called somehow Trump's plan, even though I see nothing from Trump there. So what we need, I think, summing up our interesting discussion, we need to clearly formulate the key aim of our policy. I will repeat myself one more time. Well, first, affirming the European security system, and then with joint efforts, liquidation of this source of global tension and global threat. The faster our Western partner partners will understand that, the easier it will be to live for you and me and the next generations. Thank you very much. I totally agree with your conclusion. Well, and from what I've heard, the scenario is the following. Still, the full-scale war against Russia, there's big asymmetry, the bigger territory, more people, and they have more rear, and Northern Korea is with them in this war. We need to get out of this war, but we need to wait till in more like calm region, the fall of Russia. We can do that together in unified space, and if we succeed, then, just as you mentioned, there is no common sense, but the fear from some of those might be such that, well, it's not like Putin is sending today 1,000 of dead people every day, but this is called resource, and this resource is not unlimited. And the problem is just to create the proper conditions for our people not to die. Right, like with the help of drones and robotic system, etc., etc. I will say a very cynical thing, but I will say that publicly. If Europe, well, my position here is not different from yours, but I give more chance to Russia and Putin actions against Europe. I've been participating in many negotiations with him, and I can say that his decisions might be totally irrational. And it is because of the many mental factors. So this hatred to Europe and some unrealistic desire to regain the empire, it might lead to the fact that his dream of attacking some NATO country, it might come true. In my opinion, if that will happen, that would have been fair, for European NATO countries to enter the war, because the UN Charter, that is how it says that there should be a coalition created, there should be embargo, and none of that was done. And we are told about Korea, where all of that was done. Americans were fighting. So if Americans, let us be honest, right? They are less afraid because there is distance. They are not that much afraid of nuclear weapons. But Europe is over here, near to us. And we are not saying that Ukraine will not cope. We are talking about historical senses. When he starts changing his opinion, it is weird. Well, if Ukraine wouldn't have coped, then it would have been an end to Hungary. But Ukraine will survive, and Hungary will survive without Orban. And I think that it will be the new historical period. And we won't touch upon that, but there's a lot of factors, and the policy in the country as well, their management has changed, and a lot of right and left populists. So how the events will develop, we can't even imagine. But the things that you mentioned, I totally support. First of all, some initiatives, because now we have lost how many ideas we've had, right? And safety agreements or forums, etc., but we've lost this initiative right now. That's the first thing. Second proposal to some of the NATO countries to create now the regional defense agreement. Or bilateral. And, well, that's a good agreement with Great Britain, but if that would have been in the field of defense, so we have to act right now. We have to form this joint umbrella, and then, without such things from Russia, we can wait till the end. But not just wait till the end, but also create the barrier. It's another issue, because there will be the time that with millions, there will be, and when this big territory will fall apart, it's another thing. So it's about the golden fish and the big fence, right? I don't know, but I am so grateful to you, and we did not respond about all the issues, but the goal was, thank you very much for coming, and Yeah, it is very nice to greet the colleagues from this scene. You're going to the MFA, say hello to all of our colleagues, and just tell the colleagues, don't be afraid of doing the same as Udovenko said, because he said that patriotism, no loyalty should be there. Let them be more brave and recall that according to the constitution, the law, Ukraine MFA has its role. Yeah, they are implementing in life some things that President said, but it doesn't mean that our foreign policy has to be only like foreign policy of the President's office. That is from my side. And we will support them being on non-official positions, but the second track of diplomacy that is used by Europeans, Americans, and Russians, well, it also plays its role. Thank you very much one more time. Thank you to those who came here today. I don't have the opportunity now. There is no opportunity to ask questions. Just understand us, please. But we will have the opportunity, at least I will stay and communicate. Thank you very much.